The sun had barely risen over Ainau village, yet the dusty road that cut through its heart was already alive. Women balanced basins on their heads, traders opened their stalls, and children chased one another barefoot through the morning air. But amid all the laughter and movement sat a man the villagers hardly noticed anymore, Kenneth, the beggar of Ainau. He sat on a small wooden stool beside the old mango tree near the market square, a cracked plastic bowl before him. His clothes were torn at the shoulder, his slippers worn out and barely holding together. Some days he held out his bowl, his eyes lowered in quiet shame. Other days he simply stared into space, lost in thoughts that no one cared to know. The villagers had grown used to him. Poor Kenneth, they would say. He's been begging for years. Nothing good can ever come from that one. Mothers warned their daughters to stay away from him. Children mocked him when they ran past, laughing as dust rose around his feet. Yet through all the humiliation, Kenneth never got angry. He would only smile weakly and say, "God bless you." Among all who passed by, only one person truly saw him, Queen, the daughter of Chief Raymond, one of the most respected men in Ainau. Queen was the kind of woman people stopped to admire. Her skin glowed like sunset after rain, her voice was calm, and her eyes carried a gentleness that softened even the harshest words. Though her father was wealthy and proud, Queen's heart was simple. She greeted the poor with respect, shared food with beggars, and often walked through the village without the pride most rich daughters carried like perfume. One morning, as she returned from the market carrying a basket of plantains, she stopped near the mango tree and looked at Kenneth. He was staring down, his fingers trembling slightly as he counted the few coins in his bowl. Without thinking, she took one ripe plantain from her basket and handed it to him. "Good morning," she said softly. Kenneth raised his head. His voice cracked as he replied, "Good morning, my lady." She smiled. "Don't call me that. My name is Queen." He hesitated. "Queen? That's a beautiful name." She laughed lightly. "And yours?" "Kenneth," he said, embarrassed. "I know," she said. "Everyone knows you, Kenneth." That simple exchange stayed in Kenneth's heart long after she left. He had seen beauty before, but never one mixed with kindness. Every day after that, he waited under the mango tree, hoping she would pass again. And she did. Sometimes she gave him food, sometimes just a smile, but slowly, the beggar began to feel human again. Weeks turned into months, and soon whispers began to spread through the village. People noticed how Queen always greeted Kenneth, how she sat by him sometimes when others avoided him like a disease. "It's not proper," the women said. "A chief's daughter sitting with a beggar? Unheard of." But Queen didn't care. To her, Kenneth wasn't just a beggar. He was a man who spoke gently, who prayed before eating, who never complained no matter how cruel the world was. Something in his quiet strength drew her closer. Then one afternoon, under that same mango tree, Queen said the words that shook the whole village. "I love you, Kenneth," she whispered. He froze. "Don't joke with such words, Queen. You're a chief's daughter. People like you don't marry people like me." "I'm not joking," she said, her eyes firm. "I don't care what people say. I just want you." Kenneth's heart pounded. He looked around, no one must hear this. But it was too late. Someone had. By the next morning, the entire village knew. At the market, traders dropped their baskets in shock. "Did you hear? Chief Raymond's daughter says she wants to marry Kenneth the beggar." By evening, the news reached Chief Raymond himself. He stormed into the compound, his face red with anger. Queen sat quietly on the veranda, waiting for him. "Queen," he roared. "Is it true what I've heard?" "Yes, father," she said, her voice steady. "I love Kenneth." Chief Raymond's walking stick struck the ground hard. "You have lost your mind. A beggar? A man who sits by the road like a stray dog? Over my dead body." "Father, he is not what people think," she pleaded. "He is kind, humble, and honest. He will stop begging once we marry." "Silence," the chief thundered. "If you marry him, you are no longer my daughter. I will disown you." Tears filled Queen's eyes. "Then disown me, father. I cannot marry a man I do not love." The morning Queen left her father's house, the village was still half asleep. A soft mist lay over the yam farms, and roosters were crowing lazily. Only one person saw her, her mother, standing at the doorway with trembling hands. "Queen, please don't go," she whispered. Her eyes were swollen from a night of tears. Queen's bag was small, just a few clothes and the necklace her late grandmother had given her. "Mama, I have to," she said quietly. "If I stay, I'll lose myself. Kenneth may be poor, but he loves me truly." Her mother clutched her arm. "And your father?" "He's furious. He says if you leave, you will never step into this compound again." Queen's eyes filled with tears. "Then let it be so. I'll always be his daughter, even if he refuses to call me one." Behind them, the sound of angry footsteps echoed. Chief Raymond stormed out, his wrapper tied tightly around his waist, his chest bare. His voice boomed like thunder. "So it's true," he barked. "You're leaving for that beggar?" Queen turned slowly, her voice breaking. "Yes, father. I love him. Love," he spat the word out as though it tasted bitter. "Love doesn't feed you. Love doesn't build a house or buy respect. You'll regret this foolishness, Queen." Queen knelt on the ground, her tears falling fast. "Then let me regret it, father. But don't hate me for loving." Her father looked away, his jaw tightening. "If you walk out of this gate, you are no longer my child. From this moment, you are dead too." "Me?" Her mother cried louder. "Raymond, please." "Enough," he roared. "Let her go and see what the world will teach her." Queen stood up slowly. She took one last look at the compound where she had grown up, where she had once run barefoot as a little girl. She touched her mother's hands gently. "Pray for me, Mama." Then she turned and walked away. Her father's voice followed her down the dusty path. "Don't ever come back to this house, Queen. Never." But she didn't look back. Kenneth was waiting at the junction, his small bag slung over his shoulder. When he saw her coming, his heart clenched. He had prayed she wouldn't change her mind. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. She nodded, her face pale but firm. "Yes, let's go." They walked side by side toward the main road, leaving the village behind. The early sun rose higher, warming the path before them. For hours, they said little, just held hands, comforted by each other's silence. At midday, they stopped by a small stream. Queen bent to drink water with her palms, then looked at him with tired eyes. "Kenneth," she said, "promise me something." He looked up. "What?" "Promise me we won't give up, no matter how hard things get." Kenneth hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I promise." They continued their journey until they reached the bus park. The noise of traders and honking vehicles filled the air. Kenneth used the little money he had to buy 2 seats on an old bus heading to the city. As the bus began to move, Queen leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think your new job will be enough for us?" she asked softly. "It's just the beginning," Kenneth said. "I'll work hard. You'll see." The road was long, and the city seemed like another world. When they finally arrived, Queen was overwhelmed. The buildings were tall, the air thick with exhaust fumes, and people hurried in every direction. Kenneth led her through narrow streets until they reached a tall black gate guarded by 2 men in uniform. "This is the place," he said quietly. The compound was beautiful. The grass was trimmed neatly, and the scent of flowers filled the air. Queen's eyes widened. "You work here?" Kenneth smiled shyly. "Yes. I just got the job last week. The owner is a kind woman. She said I can stay in the boys' quarters." A woman in her 50s appeared at the entrance. Her smile was polite but curious. "You must be Kenneth," she said warmly. "You're welcome. Do your work well, and you'll stay long." Kenneth nodded respectfully. "Yes, Ma. Thank you. This is Queen, my wife." The woman's brows rose slightly. "Your wife? How nice. Come in, both of you." Inside, everything gleamed, marble floors, gold curtains, and the scent of perfume that reminded Queen of wealth she had left behind. The woman's son entered soon after, a tall man in his early 30s, dressed neatly in a designer shirt. He greeted them casually, his eyes resting on Queen a moment too long. Kenneth didn't notice, but Queen did. She ignored it. Politely, the woman turned to her. "Have you gone to university, my dear?" Queen lowered her head. No, Ma. My father asked me to choose between school and the man I love. I chose him. The woman chuckled lightly. Love can be sweet, but remember, love without money is hunger with smiles. Queen smiled faintly, not offended. Maybe, Ma, but I'll rather be hungry with love than full with lies. The woman laughed. You speak boldly. My cook is away for a while. You can come to the main house to help me prepare meals. You'll learn something useful. That night, Queen sat quietly on the bed in their small room, staring at the ceiling. The compound was quiet except for the chirping of crickets. Kenneth noticed her silence. You're thinking of your father again, he said softly. She nodded. He cursed me before I left. Kenneth took her hand gently. Don't worry. One day, he'll see we made the right choice. Queen turned to him with teary eyes. Do you really think so? Yes, he said. I may be poor, Queen, but I'll never let you regret loving me. She smiled weakly and leaned on his chest. That's all I need. Outside, the city lights flickered through the window, painting soft shadows on the wall. Two hearts, once strangers, now held each other in the middle of a world that didn't believe in them. But as Queen closed her eyes that night, she didn't know that love alone would soon be tested in ways she never imagined, and that behind those golden walls, a different story was waiting to begin. The morning sun streamed gently through the curtain when Queen woke up. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The clean white wall, the neatly folded bedsheet, and the smell of polished tiles were so different from the bamboo house she had shared with her parents. Then her eyes found Kenneth sitting by the window, buttoning his new security uniform. He looked up and smiled faintly. You didn't sleep much, he said. Queen sat up slowly. I kept thinking, she whispered. Everything happened so fast. Kenneth walked over and touched her cheek. I know, but things will get better, Queen. We just have to work hard. After he left for duty, Queen arranged the small room. It wasn't big, but it was clean. She spread their clothes neatly on the shelf and placed her mother's old rosary on the table. She wanted this place to feel like home. By noon, she went to the main house to help the madam with cooking. The woman, Mrs. Douglas, was friendly but sharp-tongued. She liked things done her way. Queen, please rinse that rice again, she said, stirring a pot of stew. I like it clean. My son doesn't eat rice that smells. Queen nodded. Yes, Ma. The kitchen was large, filled with shiny pots and strange machines she had never seen before. It took her a few days to get used to everything, but she learned fast. Mrs. Douglas liked her for that. Sometimes, she even complimented her food. You have a good hand, the woman said one afternoon. You'll make a fine wife if only. You marry well. Queen smiled softly. Thank you, Ma. But Mrs. Douglas's son, Edward, had started to notice her differently. He was tall, with a confident walk and a smooth voice that carried authority. At first, Queen saw him only as her madam's son, but soon his eyes began to linger too long whenever she entered the room. One evening, as she served him food, he said, Queen, you cook like someone who has been trained in a hotel. Where did you learn? She laughed lightly. From my mother, sir. She used to sell food in our village. Your mother must be proud of you. Queen's smile faded a little. She is, but I haven't seen her since I left home. Edward looked at her curiously. Why? Queen hesitated. Because I chose love over my father's wishes. He leaned forward slightly. Love? You mean Kenneth? She nodded quietly. Edward laughed softly, shaking his head. You're too beautiful to waste yourself on a man like that. Look at you. You deserve more, Queen. You deserve a life that matches your worth. Queen's heart tightened. Sir, please don't say that. Kenneth is a good man. He may not have much, but he has a pure heart. Edward smiled faintly. Pure hearts don't pay rent. Queen forced a polite laugh and turned away, but his words stayed with her long after she left the kitchen. The following days brought quiet tension. Edward found reasons to be near her. When she swept the corridor, he walked past with a casual greeting. When she fetched vegetables, he followed her to the backyard. Each time, his words grew bolder. One afternoon, as Queen arranged dishes in the kitchen, he stood by the door watching her. Queen, he said softly, you know, I've met many women, but there's something different about you. You remind me of peace, real peace. Queen sighed. Please, sir, don't say things like that. It's not right. Why not? He asked gently. You deserve comfort, not struggle. You're young. Kenneth can't give you the life you deserve. Queen dropped the spoon in her hand. Sir, please stop. He raised his hands in surrender. Okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. But he didn't. By evening, she couldn't hide her unease. When she returned to their small room, Kenneth noticed it immediately. You're quiet again, he said, removing his shoes. Did Madam say something? Queen hesitated. No, it's just the usual stress. Kenneth smiled wearily. You'll get used to it. But she didn't sleep well that night. The next day, Mrs. Douglas returned home earlier than usual. Queen greeted her and helped carry her handbag. As they walked toward the kitchen, Queen decided to speak up. Ma, I need to tell you something. Mrs. Douglas stopped and looked at her. What is it? Queen swallowed hard. Your son, he's been saying things to me. He told me he loves me. He even said he wants to marry me and change my life. Mrs. Douglas didn't look surprised. Instead, she smiled faintly. My dear, is that what's making you sad? Queen blinked. You're not angry? Angry? The woman chuckled softly. No, my son has good taste. You're a fine girl. And to be honest, he can change your life. He can send you to school, give you everything Kenneth can't. Queen's heart pounded. But Ma, Kenneth is my husband. Mrs. Douglas shrugged. Not yet. You're not married in church or court. Don't let poverty tie your destiny, Queen. Kenneth is a good man, yes, but good hearts don't fill empty plates. Tears burned Queen's eyes. You can insult me if you want, Ma, but please don't insult Kenneth. Mrs. Douglas raised a brow. Oh, dear, don't take it that way. I'm only telling you the truth. Think about your future. Queen turned away quietly, fighting her tears. I've already made my choice. That night, the silence between Queen and Kenneth was heavy. She sat on the bed, her fingers trembling as she folded her scarf. When Kenneth entered, she forced a smile. You're not yourself, he said gently. What's wrong? Nothing, she murmured. Queen, talk to me. She hesitated, then finally told him everything, how Edward had been pursuing her, how his mother even supported him, how they promised to send her to school if she left him. Kenneth listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stared at the floor for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, maybe you should consider it. Queen froze. What did you say? He looked up slowly, his eyes tired. Queen, maybe they're right. You deserve more. I have nothing. I don't even have money to feed you well. Maybe you should let him help you. Her eyes filled with tears. Kenneth, how can you say that? You think I'm with you because of what you have? I left everything, my father, my comfort, for you. And now you want to give me away. Kenneth's throat tightened. I just want you to be happy. I am happy with you, she cried, her voice shaking. Even if we live in one room forever, I'll still be proud that it's our room. He looked at her, speechless. Queen reached for his hand. Please don't ever say that again. You are my husband, Kenneth. I don't care what the world thinks. He pulled her close, his heart breaking. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. Queen leaned against him, her tears wetting his shirt. Then promise me, she said through sobs. Promise me you'll never tell me to leave again. I promise, he said softly, kissing her forehead. Outside, the night wind brushed against the window. The lights from the mansion glowed faintly through the curtains, but inside that small room, love and pain were locked together, a fragile bond standing against a world that refused to understand it. The mansion's beauty began to lose its charm. For Queen, the walls that once felt welcoming now carried whispers she didn't want to hear. Each corner seemed to echo with temptation, and every look from Edward left her uneasy. It started small, extra compliments, innocent smiles, but soon it became harder to ignore. When she walked past him, she could feel his eyes following her. Sometimes he'd find excuses to enter the kitchen just to talk, pretending to want water or food. Queen, he said one morning as she arranged plates on the shelf, don't you ever get tired of struggling? She didn't turn. Struggling for what, sir? For a life that gives you nothing, he said softly. You're young, beautiful, and smart. You could be more than a cook in my mother's house. You could have your own car, your own business. All you need to do is choose better. Queen laughed weakly. If you mean choosing you, then no, sir. I've already chosen. Edward leaned closer. Kenneth can't give you what you deserve. You're wasting your time. Queen turned sharply. Please stop saying that. I'm married to Kenneth in my heart, even if the law says otherwise. He smirked. In your heart? That's not enough, Queen. You're too beautiful for poverty. She bit her lip and walked away. That night, she prayed before sleeping, asking God to give her strength to resist everything that could destroy her peace. Days passed, and Edward grew more persistent. He began to buy her small gifts, a scarf, a pair of shoes, perfume. Queen rejected them politely, returning each one with a calm voice. But gossip soon began to grow among the workers. Madame's son likes that village girl, one of the maids whispered near the laundry room. Another laughed. Who wouldn't? She's beautiful. But Kenneth better be careful, rich men don't compete for love, they buy it. Queen heard them once as she passed and felt her heart ache. She didn't want anyone to think she was that kind of woman. That evening, she sat by the small window of their room, staring at the lights from the big house. Kenneth was on night duty at the gate. The sound of cars passing on the main road mixed with her thoughts. She missed home. She missed her mother's laughter, the smell of firewood smoke, the sound of crickets by the mango tree. Life in the city was clean, yes, but it was also cold. Later that night, there was a knock on the door. Queen frowned. Who is it? It's me, Edward's voice came softly. Her heart jumped. Sir, please go back. Kenneth will soon be home. I just want to talk, he whispered. Please. Queen hesitated, then stood frozen when the door creaked open. Edward stepped inside, holding a small envelope. This is for you, he said. I don't need it, she said quickly. Just look at it first, he insisted. Queen's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were several crisp notes. It was more money than she had ever seen at once. She felt anger rise in her. Do you think I'm that cheap, sir? Edward sighed. No. I think you're someone who deserves more than pain. That's all. Queen's eyes filled with tears. Please leave, she whispered. If you respect me, go. Edward studied her face for a moment, then quietly turned and walked out. When Kenneth came in later, Queen pretended to be asleep. She didn't tell him what had happened. She didn't want to burden him. But her silence became heavy and her smile began to fade. Kenneth noticed. You've been quiet lately, he said one morning. Is someone troubling you? Queen forced a smile. No, I'm fine. He looked at her closely, his heart uneasy. A week later, Mrs. Douglas called Kenneth to the main house. He went, unaware that a storm was waiting. Sit down, she said, her tone cold. Kenneth, I've heard some things that worry me. Kenneth frowned. About what, Ma? About your wife, she said sharply. She's causing distractions in my house. My son can't focus because of her. I've warned her to stay in her place, but she doesn't seem to understand. Kenneth's hands shook slightly. Ma, Queen respects everyone. Don't defend her, Mrs. Douglas snapped. Maybe she's not as innocent as she looks. Maybe she enjoys the attention. Kenneth stood quietly, his heart breaking. Ma, please don't say that about her. Then control your wife, the woman said coldly. If this continues, I'll have to let you both go. Kenneth nodded silently and walked out. That evening, when he entered their room, Queen was folding laundry. He stood at the door for a long time, his face blank. Did something happen? She asked softly. He looked at her and exhaled slowly. I just came from Madame's house. She said you're making her son lose focus. Queen froze. What? She said he can't think straight because of you. She said you like the attention. Queen dropped the cloth in her hand. Kenneth, you believe her? He rubbed his forehead. I don't know what to believe anymore, Queen. Everything is just too much. Tears filled her eyes. After all we've been through, you still think I could betray you? Kenneth swallowed hard. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, she whispered. Your silence says it for you. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. Kenneth moved closer, but she stepped back. Please, she said, her voice trembling. I can bear hunger, but not your doubt. Kenneth closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. He stepped forward and held her tightly. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm just scared of losing you. Queen cried against his chest. Then trust me, Kenneth. That's all I ask. He nodded slowly, his arms tightening around her. Outside, the wind blew softly through the compound. Somewhere inside the mansion, Edward watched their small room through the balcony window, his expression unreadable. For him, the game wasn't over. For Queen and Kenneth, it had only just begun. The evening was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a long, exhausting day. Queen stood by the bed, pressing Kenneth's uniform. The room was small but clean, and the soft hiss of the hot iron filled the air. Her thoughts drifted as she worked, thoughts of home, of the road that had brought her here, and of the strange unease that now followed her everywhere. Just as she folded the last shirt, a firm knock echoed on the door. She frowned slightly. Who is it? It's Madam. Came Mrs. Douglas's voice, followed by her son's. Queen quickly placed the iron aside and opened the door. The woman and her son stepped in, both dressed neatly, their faces serious but calm. Queen's heart raced. She couldn't imagine why they would visit her room at that hour. Good evening, Ma, Queen greeted respectfully, her eyes lowered. Mrs. Douglas smiled faintly. Good evening, Queen. Don't be afraid, my dear. We just came to talk. Queen stepped aside, letting them in. Edward leaned casually on the wall while his mother sat on the only plastic chair in the room. She looked around, her eyes sweeping over the modest space before pulling something from her handbag. It was an international passport. Brand new. Clean. This, she said, raising it slightly, belongs to you. Queen blinked in confusion. Ma? Mrs. Douglas smiled. You heard me right. I had it prepared in your name. Everything is ready, visa, documents, even a ticket. You can travel to the United States in less than 2 weeks. Queen's lips parted in disbelief. Ma, are you serious? Very serious, the woman said, her tone smooth. But there's only one thing you need to do. Queen swallowed. What's that? Mrs. Douglas glanced briefly at her son before turning back to her. Say yes. Yes to what, Ma? To my son, Mrs. Douglas said softly. He loves you. He's ready to change your life. You'll go to school abroad, live like a queen, and never worry about poverty again. All you have to do is agree to marry him. For a moment, Queen just stood there, frozen. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. Ma, thank you, but I can't. Edward stepped forward. Queen, think about it. This isn't a trick. I can give you everything, money, comfort, education. You'll never have to cook for anyone again. Queen looked up, her voice firm though her eyes glistened. Sir, I'm not for sale. You can't buy love with passports and promises. Mrs. Douglas frowned. Queen, don't be foolish. Kenneth has nothing. What kind of future can you build with him? He's just a guard. You're young, you deserve more. Queen smiled sadly. Maybe you're right, Ma. But I'd rather be poor beside the man I love than rich beside a stranger. The woman stared at her, surprised by her calmness. Are you saying no? Yes, Ma, Queen said quietly. I'll never exchange my love for Kenneth with anything. Mrs. Douglas sighed deeply and stood. Think about it, Queen. Think carefully. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Edward followed her silently, his face cold. Before leaving, Mrs. Douglas paused by the door. I'm disappointed in you, but I'll give you time. When you change your mind, and you will, you know where to find me. When the door closed behind them, Queen felt her knees grow weak. She sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding. For a long time, she said nothing. The room felt heavier than ever. The passport still lay on the table where Mrs. Douglas had placed it for her to see. A silent reminder of what she had just turned down. When Kenneth returned later that night, sweat on his forehead from the long shift, he noticed her still sitting there, lost in thought. What's wrong? He asked gently. Queen looked up, her eyes tired. "They came here," she said softly. "Madam and her son." Kenneth frowned. What did they want? She told him everything, the passport, the promises, the offer to send her abroad if only she agreed to leave him. Her voice broke halfway through, but she finished every word. Kenneth's hands tightened into fists. He looked toward the door as if he might storm out, but Queen caught his arm. "Don't," she said quickly. "They're not worth it." He looked at her, guilt washing over his face. "I shouldn't have brought you here, Queen. You don't deserve this kind of life." She touched his hand gently. "Stop saying that, Kenneth. I'm here because I love you. But we can't stay in this house anymore. I feel like they'll never let us rest." Kenneth nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "You're right. We'll leave soon." He sat beside her and held her close. The sound of his heartbeat steadied her own. "Everything will be fine," he whispered. "I promise." Queen closed her eyes and rested her head on his shoulder. But deep inside, fear lingered. She could feel that the people in that house were not done with them yet. Outside, the city was quiet. The wind rustled through the mango tree by the gate. Somewhere beyond the compound walls, the world moved on, unaware that inside a small room, two hearts had just chosen love over luxury, faith over temptation. And though the night was calm, a storm was slowly gathering. Mrs. Douglas and Kenneth stood inside the main house. The afternoon was calm, the air filled with the soft smell of air freshener and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. "Sir," Mrs. Douglas said gently, "I think you should be fast with the marriage." "I have never seen a woman like Queen." Kenneth smiled faintly. "Now you have agreed with me," he said with a light laugh. "When I told you that I would find the best, you doubted me." Mrs. Douglas smiled back, breathing out slowly. "You have finally found the person you have been looking for." Kenneth nodded and looked satisfied. "Yes, Ma, I truly have." But as he spoke, Mrs. Douglas's eyes softened. She stared at him quietly, and for a moment, she was no longer seeing the man standing in front of her. She was seeing the little boy she once cared for. In her heart, memories came flooding back. She remembered the days Kenneth was still small, running around the big house with his mother's laughter echoing behind him. Then she remembered how everything changed after his mother's death. Kenneth was only 10 then. His father had remarried too soon, and that new woman had turned their lives into misery. Mrs. Douglas could still picture it, the nights Kenneth would sneak into her small room just to eat leftover bread because the new wife had locked the kitchen. She remembered his tears when his stepmother shouted at him for touching food. She remembered how thin he became, how often she'd find him sitting outside quietly, hungry, but too scared to speak. Those bitter years had left marks on him, and she knew they were the reason he had become such a careful man. His stepmother's cruelty had even contributed to his father's death, and after the burial, the woman threw Kenneth out of the house with nothing but his small bag. Mrs. Douglas had wanted to take him in, but she was poor and powerless then. Yet, she never stopped praying for him. And now, standing before her, that same boy had become a man calm, wise, and strong. She breathed deeply and smiled. "You've really come far," she said softly, almost to herself. Kenneth looked at her, not sure what she meant, but he smiled politely. "Thank you, Ma." "You've done well for yourself," she added, nodding slowly. He smiled again. "All thanks to God. And Queen. She changed everything." Mrs. Douglas's smile widened. "She's truly special," she said quietly. Kenneth's eyes lit up when he spoke. "Yes, Ma. She's the one I've been praying for. She's pure. She didn't see a beggar. She saw a man." Mrs. Douglas nodded thoughtfully, still lost in her own quiet reflections. It all made sense now why Kenneth had chosen to live like a beggar when he first returned from abroad. He had wanted to find love that was real, love that wasn't tied to wealth. He wanted to be sure that the woman he chose wasn't another version of his cruel stepmother. He had tested love the hard way, and he had found it. "I will be back," Kenneth said finally, breaking her thoughts. Mrs. Douglas blinked, returning to the present. She nodded gently. "All right," she said, her voice calm. She watched as Kenneth turned and walked away toward the door. For a moment, she just stood there, her heart full. She remembered the small boy who once cried for food, and now here he was, a man planning to marry the woman who loved him without knowing his true identity. As the door closed behind him, Mrs. Douglas whispered quietly to herself, "You finally found her, my son. You finally found her." That afternoon, the sun fell softly across the mansion yard, painting the tiles with gold. Queen was in their small room sweeping when Kenneth walked in, holding a brown package in his hand. His face carried that calm smile she had come to know, the kind that always made her heart feel safe. "Queen," he called gently. She turned around, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "You're back early. Is everything all right?" "Yes," Kenneth said, stepping closer. "I have something for you." He handed her the package carefully. "Madame's son will be proposing to his girlfriend today," he explained. "This is the cloth you will wear." Queen blinked, surprised. "For me?" "Open it," he said, smiling. Queen untied the ribbon slowly, her fingers trembling with curiosity. When the paper fell open, she gasped loudly. Inside was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen, soft sky blue fabric that shimmered slightly under the light, neatly folded with matching shoes and a necklace. She covered her mouth in disbelief. "Kenneth," she cried. "Am I the one they are proposing to? This cloth is too beautiful." Kenneth laughed warmly, the sound filling the small room. "You're not the one being proposed to," he said teasingly, "but I want my woman to be beautiful too." Queen laughed through her surprise. "You're unbelievable. I've never worn anything like this before." "Kenneth, where did you even get the money?" He grinned and shrugged slightly. "I'll explain everything when we get back," he said, his eyes glowing with something she couldn't quite read. Queen held the dress to her chest and twirled lightly in excitement. "It's so fine. You didn't have to, but thank you." "I wanted to," Kenneth replied, still smiling. "You've made me proud, Queen. You deserve something special." Queen sat on the bed, running her fingers over the soft fabric, her heart full. "Kenneth, sometimes I still wonder what I did to deserve you." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe you just loved the right man at the right time." She looked up at him, still smiling. "And maybe God brought me here for a reason." Kenneth nodded slowly, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Yes," he said softly, "for a reason." They shared a quiet moment, both lost in their thoughts. Queen folded the dress neatly again and placed it back inside the package. "I'll keep it safe until evening," she said happily. "I don't want anything to stain it." Kenneth nodded. "Good. We'll go to the main house together when it's time." Queen smiled and stood up. "Let me make you something to eat first," she said warmly. As she moved toward the small gas cooker, Kenneth watched her silently. His eyes lingered on her the way a man looks at something he's afraid to lose. He knew she still didn't understand what was coming, that the evening's event would not just be a proposal for someone else, but a moment that would change their lives forever. Still, he said nothing. He only smiled when she turned around and teased, "You're staring too much." "What's on your mind?" "Nothing," Kenneth said softly. "I'm just happy." Queen laughed, shaking her head. "You and your secrets. You said you'll explain when we get back, remember?" Kenneth nodded again. "I promise I will." But deep inside, he knew that by the end of that night, Queen would finally understand everything, who he truly was, why he had come to her as a beggar, and why he had chosen her above all others. For now, though, he just wanted her to smile. And as she hummed softly while cooking, the little room filled with warmth, the kind that comes only from love that has been tested and proven true. The Douglas mansion that evening glowed brighter than ever before. The sitting room was alive with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of glasses. Men in neat suits stood in groups talking, while women in fine dresses walked gracefully, holding glasses of wine and smiling politely. Everything looked beautiful, like a scene from a dream. Queen stood in her small room, staring at the mirror. For a long time, she couldn't recognize herself. The red gown Kenneth had given her earlier hugged her figure perfectly, its silky fabric shining under the soft light. The matching shoes and necklace made her look like someone from another world. She smiled faintly, touching her hair, which she had neatly packed into a bun. "Is this really me?" she whispered. Her reflection smiled back, almost like a stranger. She took one last deep breath and stepped out of the room. The sound of soft music grew louder as she approached the sitting room. She had been told that Madame's son would be proposing to his girlfriend that evening. That was why she had been asked to dress beautifully and come to the main house. Kenneth had gone ahead to help with arrangements, and she wanted to find him. As she stepped into the grand sitting room, all heads turned. The red gown glowed against her skin, and for a moment, the room fell silent. Even the music seemed to fade. She felt a little shy under the admiring eyes of the guests, but smiled politely and began looking around for Kenneth. She was still scanning the room when something made her stop. Right in front of her, in the middle of the sitting room, a man in a red long-sleeved shirt and black trousers was kneeling on one knee, holding a small open box with a shining ring inside. The man was Kenneth. Queen froze where she stood, her heart thundering in her chest. "Kenneth," she whispered in shock. The crowd began to clap softly as Kenneth smiled up at her. His eyes glistened with emotion. "Queen," he said softly, "you left everything behind just to stand by me. You gave me love when I had nothing to give back. You saw a beggar, but you treated him like a king. Tonight, I want to ask you again, will you still choose me?" Queen's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled. "Kenneth, what is going on?" He smiled gently. "It's your proposal, my love." The guests clapped louder. Mrs. Douglas stood at the corner, smiling proudly. Tears rolled down Queen's cheeks as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Kenneth slipped the ring onto her finger as the hall erupted in applause. For a moment, Queen stood dazed, unable to believe what had just happened. She turned to Kenneth as he held her hand tightly, smiling at her with deep affection. Later, after the celebration had calmed and most guests had left, Kenneth took Queen outside to the quiet garden behind the mansion. The night breeze was cool, the sound of crickets soft in the distance. The golden lights from the house flickered faintly against the flowers. Queen turned to him, still overwhelmed. "Kenneth," she said, "please tell me the truth. What just happened? Why were all those people clapping for us? I thought Madame's son was the one proposing today." Kenneth smiled, his eyes warm. "That's exactly what everyone thought," he said quietly. "But the proposal was meant for you all along." "I don't understand," Queen said softly, shaking her head. He took her hands gently. "Queen, there's something I've been hiding from you. I needed to be sure before telling you." She looked into his eyes, her heart racing. "What is it?" Kenneth took a deep breath. "Mrs. Douglas is not Madame's son's mother. She's my nanny. She raised me since I was a baby. The man you thought was her son, Daniel, is actually my driver. We planned everything together." Queen's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "Yes," Kenneth said calmly. "I asked Mrs. Douglas to act as Madame, and Daniel pretended to be her son. I wanted to see if you would still love me if I was poor. I wanted to be sure you were different from the kind of women who only love money." Queen covered her mouth, her tears spilling again. "So all this time, you were testing me?" He nodded gently. "Yes. I was the real master of this mansion, Queen. My father owned this place before he died. Mrs. Douglas was our family nanny. After my father passed, I left the country, rebuilt our company, and returned quietly. I didn't want fame or flattery. I wanted real love. So I disguised myself as a security man. That's how I found you." Queen's tears flowed freely now. "Oh, Kenneth." He cupped her face tenderly. "You didn't see a beggar. You saw a man. You loved me when I had nothing, and that's something I'll never forget. I wasn't testing you to mock you, Queen. I was searching for truth. And I found it in you." Queen began to cry harder, half in disbelief, half in joy. "I can't believe this. You mean all this mansion, Madame, Daniel, it was all you?" "Yes," Kenneth said with a small smile. "And now it's all yours too." Queen shook her head, laughing through her tears. "You're a strange man, Kenneth. You made me fall in love with a beggar, only to find out I've been loving a king." Kenneth laughed softly. "Maybe that's what makes our story beautiful." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She rested her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. "I love you, Kenneth," she whispered. "I love you more," he said quietly. "And now, the world will know that the beggar they mocked has the most beautiful queen." They stood there under the night sky, surrounded by soft light and quiet music still playing from inside. The journey that began on a dusty village road had led them here to a mansion filled with truth, love, and grace. For Queen, it was more than a proposal. It was proof that love, when true, never goes unrewarded. The morning after the proposal, Queen woke up early. The golden sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching her face softly. She blinked, still half dreaming, but the memory of last night came rushing back like a flood, the laughter, the cheers, Kenneth kneeling before her, and the truth she could still hardly believe. Her husband-to-be was not a poor man. He was the owner of the very mansion she worked in, the man who had come to her village disguised as a beggar just to test her love. She sat up slowly, still overwhelmed. "So it was all true," she whispered. Kenneth came in quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You're awake," he said, smiling. "Drink this. You need to rest after last night." Queen took the cup, her eyes soft. "I still can't believe everything, Kenneth. You had all that wealth and still lived like a poor man." Kenneth chuckled gently. "Maybe I had to. I didn't want a woman who would love what I owned. I wanted one who would love who I am. And you proved that to me." Queen shook her head in wonder. "You changed everything. I thought I was marrying a beggar, but God gave me a king." He reached for her hand, his tone warm and calm. "And I thought I was testing love, but I found peace instead." They both smiled quietly. After breakfast, Kenneth sat by the window, lost in thought. "Queen," he said after a long silence, "there's one thing left for us to do." She looked at him curiously. "What's that?" He turned toward her. "We have to go back to Aina village. You need to see your father again. And I want him to see what his daughter has become." Queen's face changed. "Kenneth, he cursed me. He said I was dead to him." "I know," Kenneth said gently, "but he's still your father. Sometimes people speak from pride, not truth. Let's go back and show him that love didn't destroy you, it built you." Queen hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "Do you think he'll forgive me?" Kenneth smiled softly. "He will. You just have to show him that the beggar he rejected gave you happiness." By afternoon, the car was ready. Mrs. Douglas came out to see them off. She hugged Queen tightly. "You made him a better man, my daughter. Go and bring peace to your family." Queen smiled. "Thank you, Ma." Kenneth shook her hand. "You'll always be family." They drove off, leaving the mansion behind. The long road to Aina felt different this time. The same trees, the same dusty paths, but now Queen sat in a luxury car beside the man the whole village once mocked. She looked out of the window, her heart heavy and full at the same time. When they reached the village, people stopped and stared. Children ran after the car, shouting in excitement. Women left their market stalls to look. Word spread quickly, Queen had returned, and she wasn't alone. The car stopped right in front of Chief Raymond's compound. The chief was sitting outside with 2 elders when he saw the black SUV pull in. His eyes narrowed, confusion written on his face. Queen stepped out first, dressed in a simple but elegant gown. Kenneth followed, opening the door for her. The villagers who had gathered around murmured in surprise. "Is that not the beggar?" one woman whispered. Another replied, "No, look at him. That's not a beggar. That man looks like a prince." Queen walked slowly toward her father, her hands shaking slightly. "Father," she said softly. "It's me, Queen." Chief Raymond stood up, his face a mix of shock and pride he was trying hard to hide. "Queen," he said weakly. You came back?" "Yes, father," she whispered. "I came to tell you that I'm fine, and that Kenneth is not who you thought he was." Kenneth stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." The chief stared at him in disbelief. You're that beggar from the roadside." Kenneth nodded gently. "Yes, sir. The same man. But I was never truly a beggar. I was searching for a heart that loved without price. Your daughter gave me that." The chief's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" I'm the owner of Douglas Holdings, Kenneth said quietly. This car, the house in the city, the company, they're all mine. I came to your village disguised, to find a wife who would love me for me, and your daughter was the one. Gasps filled the air. The villagers stood speechless. Chief Raymond's mouth fell open. Queen stepped closer. Father, I didn't marry him for money. I married him for love. You cursed me because you thought I was throwing my life away, but look at me now. Love didn't destroy me. It blessed me. For a long moment, the chief said nothing. His hands trembled as he looked at them both. Then slowly, his eyes softened. My daughter, he whispered. I was wrong. Queen's tears fell freely. Father. Chief Raymond took a deep breath and stepped forward. Forgive me, my child. I spoke in anger. I didn't see what you saw. Kenneth, forgive me too. Kenneth smiled kindly. There's nothing to forgive, sir. You were only protecting your daughter. The chief nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. He reached out, pulling Queen into his arms. The crowd clapped, some smiling, some crying softly. Queen buried her face in her father's shoulder, her heart finally at peace. Kenneth stood behind her, his eyes bright with emotion. In that moment, all the pain of the past was washed away, the mocking, the rejection, the curses. The beggar and the chief's daughter had returned home, not as outcasts, but as living proof that love, when pure, can rise above everything. As they left the compound later that evening, the villagers waved, calling out blessings. Chief Raymond stood at the gate, watching them go, his heart lighter than it had been in years. And as the car disappeared down the dusty road, he whispered softly to himself, she chose love, and love chose her right. A few months later, the sound of music filled Ignaw village again, not for a burial or a chief's meeting this time, but for a celebration that shook the entire community. From the market square to the palace road, everyone was talking about the same thing. The beggar was getting married to the chief's daughter. The compound of Chief Raymond was beautifully decorated. Bright flowers hung across bamboo poles, and colorful fabrics waved in the light breeze. Cars lined the road as guests from the city and the village poured in. Laughter and the smell of jollof rice floated through the air. Inside the chief's living room, Queen sat quietly before a large mirror. Her white wedding gown glittered under the sunlight coming through the window. Her hair was styled neatly, her face glowing with peace. Her mother stood behind her, fixing her veil gently. My daughter, her mother whispered, her voice shaky with emotion, you look like an angel. Queen smiled softly. Mama, do you remember the day I left this house? I cried all night thinking I would never come back. Her mother nodded, tears filling her eyes. And look at you now. God turned your pain into a blessing. There was a gentle knock on the door. When it opened, Kenneth stepped in, wearing a cream-colored suit that made him look regal. He stopped and stared at Queen for a moment, his eyes full of admiration. You look perfect, he said softly. Queen smiled shyly. And you look like the man I fell in love with, only better dressed. They both laughed quietly, the sound warm and sincere. Chief Raymond entered behind Kenneth, dressed in his royal attire. The room fell silent. Queen stood slowly, unsure what to expect. Her father looked at her for a long moment, then walked up and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. I wronged you, my daughter, he said, his voice low but steady. I let pride blind me. You saw what I could not see. You saw the heart behind the rags. I'm proud of you. Queen's eyes filled with tears. Father. He smiled and turned to Kenneth. And you, I called you a beggar. I mocked you. But today, I bless you. You've shown this village that wealth isn't in clothing or gold, but in character. Kenneth bowed respectfully. Thank you, sir. The chief raised his hand gently. Go and build your home on love. Let what joined you in pain keep you in peace. The ceremony began in the compound soon after. The priest blessed their union, the crowd clapped, and songs filled the air. Children danced at the edge of the field, and the women ululated joyfully. Even the old men who had once laughed at Kenneth were now nodding proudly, saying, he was wise all along. When it was time for speeches, Kenneth stood, holding Queen's hand tightly. His voice was calm but firm. I came to this village as a beggar, and people mocked me. But what I found was greater than gold. I found love that didn't ask for proof. He paused, smiling at Queen. I wanted a heart that would stay even when everything was gone, and I found it in this woman. The guests clapped loudly. Queen wiped her tears and looked at him lovingly. And I, she said softly, found a man who taught me that love isn't about what someone has, but who they are. Kenneth showed me that humility is the true sign of greatness. The chief smiled proudly. The villagers nodded, and even Mrs. Douglas, sitting at the front row in a lace gown, wiped her eyes discreetly. After the ceremony, when the music rose again and people began to dance, Queen and Kenneth slipped away quietly to the mango tree outside the compound, the same kind of tree where they had first met years ago in the village. Queen leaned on him, smiling as the wind brushed through her veil. Do you remember the day you used to sit under the mango tree, begging for food? She asked gently. Kenneth chuckled. I remember every bit of it. The day you stopped to talk to me changed my life. Queen smiled. It changed mine too. They both laughed softly, holding hands as the evening sun painted the sky gold. Behind them, the village drums continued to play, and voices rose in celebration. For once, there was no division between the rich and the poor, only joy, only love. As the sun began to set, Kenneth turned to Queen. What do you think we'll tell our children one day? He asked playfully. Queen smiled, her eyes glistening. We'll tell them that their father was once a beggar who tested love, and their mother passed the test. Kenneth laughed and pulled her close. Then they'll know that real love still exists. She nodded, resting her head against his chest. And as they stood there, the world seemed quiet for a while. Just two hearts, once broken and doubted, now whole again. The beggar and the chief's daughter had finally written their story, not on paper, but in the hearts of everyone who ever doubted love. True love is not found in wealth or beauty, but in faith, humility, and a kind heart. When love is pure, it can rise above mockery, poverty, and pride, and in the end, it always wins.